My name is Lucian, 32 years old, and I never thought my own family would drag me to court over the downtown loft I purchased through years of sweat and sacrifice. While I built my software development career brick by brick, my brother Ethan floated between genius ventures that mysteriously never materialized. Then one day, he decided my home should be his, and our parents agreed. Before I dive into this nightmare, let me know where you're watching from, and hit that subscribe button if you've ever had family try to take what's rightfully yours. Trust me, what happened next will make your jaw drop. Growing up in a modest neighborhood on the outskirts of Chicago, I learned early on that I occupied a different space in my parents' hearts than my younger brother Ethan did. Our house wasn't large, a 3-bedroom ranch with faded blue siding that my father Robert was perpetually promising to replace. My mother Karen worked as an administrative assistant at the local high school, while my father sold insurance. We weren't poor, but there certainly wasn't money to spare. From the beginning, there seemed to be an unwritten family rule. Lucian works, Ethan dreams. I was the kid with the paper route at 12, mowing lawns by 14, and balancing school with a part-time job at the local grocery store throughout high school. Meanwhile, Ethan was encouraged to focus on his creativity. When I needed new shoes for track, I bought them with my own money. When Ethan needed specialized art supplies, or the latest electronic gadget for one of his projects, my parents somehow found room in the budget. "Your brother has a special mind," my mother would say whenever I questioned the disparity. "He just needs the right opportunity to flourish." I remember one Christmas when I was 16, and Ethan was 14. I had saved for months to buy myself a refurbished laptop for school. Nothing fancy, just functional. On Christmas morning, Ethan unwrapped a brand new top-of-the-line computer for his digital art projects. My parents beamed as he celebrated, while I sat quietly with my new socks and discount bookstore gift card. When I caught my mother's eye, she just shrugged. "You already have a computer, honey." Ethan really needed this. Despite these dynamics, I wasn't bitter, at least not deeply. I believed hard work would pay off, and in many ways it did. When college acceptance letters arrived, I had options, though none with the scholarships I'd hoped for. My parents sat me down for the talk. "We want to help Lucian, but there just isn't much saved for your college," my father explained. "With Ethan's special needs programs all these years." I nodded, having expected this. While my friends had parents who'd been saving since their birth, mine had been pouring resources into Ethan's ever-changing interests, music lessons. He abandoned specialty camps. He returned from early private tutors who couldn't seem to capture his unique learning style. I attended State University, working 30 hours weekly between a campus job at the library and weekend shifts at a local restaurant. I lived in the cheapest dormitory, ate ramen more than I care to remember, and still graduated with student loans, but I graduated. With a degree in computer science, I landed an entry-level programming job at a mid-sized tech company in downtown Chicago. The early years were lean. I shared an apartment with 2 other guys in a neighborhood that could generously be called transitional. I took on freelance coding projects on weekends, slowly building a portfolio and a savings account. When the opportunity came to join a promising startup, I took the risk, working punishing hours for equity instead of a higher salary. 3 years later, when the company was acquired, my gamble paid off, not with millions, but with enough to put a substantial down payment on a property. The loft wasn't enormous, but in Chicago's revitalized warehouse district, it was a dream. Exposed brick walls, 12-foot ceilings, massive windows overlooking the city skyline, and within walking distance of the lake. At just under 1,000 square feet, it was perfect for me. The day I signed the final paperwork, I stood alone in the empty space, listening to my footsteps echo against the hardwood floors, and felt a pride I'd never experienced before. During these years, Ethan had bounced between community college programs, never completing any. There was the screenplay he was writing that would revolutionize cinema, the app idea that was basically Instagram before Instagram existed, and the various bands where he was always creative differences away from success. My parents continued to subsidize his lifestyle, letting him live at home, rent-free, well into his 20s, always talking about his potential as though it were a tangible asset just waiting to be cashed in. I had been in my loft for about 2 years when I met Madison at a tech conference. She was sharp, ambitious, and refreshingly direct a project manager at a competing firm who called out a flaw in my presentation, but then offered a solution over coffee afterward. We began dating, and for the first time, I felt like I had a true partner, someone who valued ambition and follow-through as much as I did. Madison understood family complexity. Her own sister had struggled with addiction issues for years. Families develop roles for people early on, she once told me, and it's almost impossible to break out of them without someone feeling threatened. Her words proved prophetic, the rainy Tuesday when my doorbell rang unexpectedly. Through the peephole, I saw Ethan hair longer than when I'd last seen him, at our parents' anniversary dinner. His vintage leather jacket spattered with rain, an oversized portfolio case tucked under his arm. "Hey bro," he said, when I opened the door, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "Nice place. Really nice." His eyes scanned my home with an evaluative gaze that made me immediately uncomfortable. "Mind if I crash here for a bit, just until my new venture gets off the ground? You won't even know I'm here." I had no idea that this casual request would spiral into a nightmare that would test every relationship in my life and force me to defend the very foundation I'd built my life upon. Ethan stood in my living room, dripping rainwater onto my hardwood floors, looking around my loft with the air of someone appraising a potential purchase. At 30, my brother still maintained the carefully cultivated appearance of a tortured artist, his dark hair just long enough to suggest he couldn't be bothered with regular haircuts, designer jeans that somehow looked authentically distressed, despite their obvious price tag, and an assortment of leather bracelets around his wrists that he claimed were from this incredible artisan in Barcelona. "So what do you think?" he asked, dropping his portfolio case onto my couch and shrugging off his jacket. "I figure I can set up my workspace by those windows. The light is perfect." I stood there, keys still in hand, trying to process his presumption. "Ethan, I didn't say you could stay here. What happened to your apartment in Wicker Park?" He waved dismissively. "Creative differences with my roommates. They just don't understand the process, you know. An artist needs space to breathe, to create without judgment." This was classic, Ethan reframing his failures as others' inability to appreciate his genius. I later learned from our cousin that Ethan had been evicted for not paying rent for 3 months while spending money on a vintage synthesizer. "What's this new venture?" I asked, hanging my keys on the hook by the door, trying to keep my tone neutral. Ethan's eyes lit up, and he unzipped his portfolio case with a theatrical flourish. "I'm developing a concept album that's also an interactive digital experience. It's going to completely revolutionize how people consume music." He pulled out a tablet and showed me crude mock-ups of what looked like a basic music visualization app, along with fragments of lyrics that struck me as derivative at best. "That's interesting." I offered, not wanting to crush his enthusiasm, but already sensing where this conversation was heading. "But Ethan, I can't just have you move in here. This is a one-bedroom loft. There's no space." His expression darkened. "Come on, Lucian. You've got all this room to yourself. What's the big deal? It's not like you're using that space by the windows for anything important." "I work from home 3 days a week. That's my office area. You can work anywhere I need northern light for my creative process." This was the crux of our lifelong dynamic. My practical needs always considered flexible, his creative requirements treated as immutable necessities. "Look," I said, trying a different approach, "I know a guy at Tech Hub who's looking for someone to manage their social media. It's not glamorous, but it's steady work while you develop your project. And I'm happy to look over your business plan, maybe help you find some investors." "I don't need a job," he interrupted, his voice taking on the injured tone I recognized from countless family discussions. "I need time and space to create. You have no idea how close I am to breaking through. This could be huge, Lucian." "Don't you want to support your brother's dream?" "Of course, I support your dreams," I replied carefully. "But I support them by offering practical help, not by turning my home into your studio." Ethan paced across my living room, running his hands through his hair in frustration. "You sound just like those venture capitalists who couldn't see the potential in my last project. Everyone's so obsessed with proven concepts and market viability. True innovation doesn't fit into your neat little boxes." I sighed, recognizing the familiar pattern. Any resistance to Ethan's desires was reframed as a failure of imagination on the other person's part. "I can help you find an affordable place, Maybe cover your first month's rent. I already told Mom and Dad I'd be staying with you, he cut in his tone suddenly casual. They thought it was a great idea, said it would be good for us to reconnect. The revelation hit me like a bucket of cold water. You told them before asking me. I knew you'd say yes, he shrugged. We're family, right? This presumption that my boundaries were merely suggestions to be overridden by family obligation ignited a slow burn of anger in my chest. Ethan, you can't stay here. I'm sorry if that's inconvenient, but this is my home. He stared at me with growing indignation. Wow. Just wow. You've really changed. You know that. All this success has made you selfish. What happened to looking out for each other? This isn't about selfishness, I countered. It's about respect. You don't make plans to live in someone else's home without their permission. The conversation deteriorated from there. Ethan accused me of abandoning family values, of being corrupted by corporate America, of forgetting where I came from. I maintained my position, offering alternatives that he dismissed outright. Madison texted to say she was on her way over with dinner, providing a natural endpoint to the argument. Fine, Ethan finally said, shoving his materials back into his portfolio case with theatrical force. I'll figure something out myself. I always do. Ethan, wait. I started not wanting him to leave like this. No, you've made yourself perfectly clear, he snapped, zipping his jacket with angry jerks. Your precious privacy is more important than helping your brother. I get it. As he reached the door, he turned back, his expression hardening. You know what, Lucian? You're going to regret this. When my project takes off and everyone's talking about it, you'll remember this moment when you could have been part of something revolutionary but were too small-minded to see it. The door slammed behind him, leaving me standing alone in my loft, a knot of guilt and frustration tightening in my stomach. I tried calling him twice, but he didn't pick up. I sent a text reiterating my offer to help him find a place and connect him with job opportunities, but it remained unread. When Madison arrived, 30 minutes later, with takeout Thai food, I recounted the conversation. She listened thoughtfully, then said, You set a reasonable boundary. That's healthy, not selfish. Try telling that to my family, I replied, pushing rice around my plate. In their eyes, saying no to Ethan is practically a betrayal. Madison squeezed my hand. Stand your ground, Lucian. This is your home. You worked for it. You deserve to feel comfortable in it. I nodded, grateful for her support, but still uneasy. The look in Ethan's eyes as he left had been more than disappointment, it had been calculating, almost vengeful. I thought that was the end of it. I had no idea my own family was about to declare war on me. The barrage began the very next morning. I was in the middle of a video conference with clients when my phone started vibrating with incoming calls from my mother. By noon, I had 4 voicemails, each progressively more emotional, culminating in my mother tearfully asking, How could you put your own brother out on the street? I waited until my lunch break to return the call, mentally preparing myself for the conversation. My mother answered on the first ring. Lucian, what's going on? Ethan is devastated. I took a deep breath. Mom, Ethan showed up at my door yesterday, expecting to move in without even asking me first. That's not reasonable. He's your brother, she replied, as if this single fact invalidated any need for basic courtesy. He's going through a difficult time right now. His creative breakthrough is so close, and he needs a stable environment. I understand that, and I offered to help him find a place and even cover his first month's rent. I offered to connect him with a job that would still leave him plenty of time for his project. There was a pause then. Your father wants to speak with you. My father's voice came on the line, his tone unusually stern. Son, we raised you to put family first. Ethan has special needs. Dad, he's 30 years old. His special need is to finally face adult responsibilities. That's very judgmental, coming from someone who's had everything handed to him. The statement was so breathtakingly out of touch with reality that for a moment I couldn't respond. Everything handed to me, Dad. I worked through college. I built my career while Ethan was still living in your basement rent-free. I saved for years to buy my place. And now you have more than you need while your brother struggles. That seems fair to you. The conversation circled like this for nearly 20 minutes, with my attempts at logical explanation met with emotional appeals and revisionist history about my supposedly privileged path. Finally, my mother suggested a family dinner to sort things out properly. That Sunday, I arrived at my parents' house, the same house I'd grown up in, though now, with a new coat of the blue paint my father had promised for decades. The atmosphere was tense from the moment I stepped through the door. Ethan sat at the dining table looking martyred, while my mother hovered around him solicitously, offering his favorite foods and sympathetic pats on the shoulder. Dinner was a minefield of passive-aggressive comments and loaded questions. My father asked about my fancy downtown lifestyle, with an edge I'd never heard before. My mother repeatedly mentioned how Ethan's artistic sensibilities required just the right environment to flourish. Ethan himself said little, maintaining an air of wounded dignity that made my stomach churn. The true agenda revealed itself over dessert, my mother's apple pie, that had always been reserved for special occasions and peace offerings. "We've been thinking," my father began, setting down his fork, "with deliberate care about your loft situation." "My loft situation," I repeated, already wary. "It's really more space than one person needs," my mother chimed in, "and in such a prime location, perfect for someone trying to network in the creative industry." I looked between them, the realization dawning. "Are you suggesting I give my loft to Ethan?" "Not give," my father clarified, though his clarification did nothing to mitigate the absurdity. "But maybe a temporary arrangement. You could stay with Madison or rent a smaller place for a while, just until Ethan's project takes off." The casual entitlement of the suggestion left me momentarily speechless. They weren't just asking me to let Ethan crash on my couch, they were asking me to vacate my home so he could have it. That's not going to happen. I finally managed. "It's my home. I bought it. I pay the mortgage." "Don't be selfish, Lucian," my mother scolded. "Ethan needs this opportunity. You're already established in your career." "Because I worked for it. I didn't wait for someone to hand me the perfect environment." Ethan finally spoke, his voice quiet, but cutting. "Not everyone can sell their soul to corporate America like you did. Some of us have a greater purpose." The conversation rapidly devolved after that. My parents insisted they had always supported both of us equally, a claim so disconnected from reality that I actually laughed out loud, which only inflamed tensions further. My father brought up dubious loans he claimed to have given me during college. In reality, occasional $20 bills slipped to me when I visited home, barely covering my gas to drive there. "We've supported you your entire life," my father insisted, his voice rising. "And now, when your family needs something from you, you turn your back." "I've offered help, real practical help," I countered. "But giving up my home is not on the table. Not now, not ever." My father's face reddened. "You know, legally speaking, we've contributed significantly to your property." I stared at him, bewildered. "What are you talking about? You haven't contributed a penny to my loft." "We paid for your education." "No, you didn't. I worked and took out loans that I'm still paying off. And we provided the foundation for your success." He continued as if I hadn't spoken. "There's such a thing as family property rights." The absurdity of his claim would have been comical if it weren't so alarming. "That's not a real thing, Dad. My name is on the deed. I paid for it. End of discussion." My mother began to cry, a tactic that had often worked to make me acquiesce as a child. I never thought I'd see the day when my own son would be so heartless. I stood up, unable to tolerate any more emotional manipulation. "I'm not being heartless. I'm maintaining a reasonable boundary. Ethan is welcome to visit my home anytime, but he cannot live there, and I certainly won't be giving it to him." "If that's your final answer," my father said coldly, "then you leave us no choice." "No choice but what?" "We'll have to pursue legal options to ensure family resources are fairly distributed." I laughed, thinking it was a bluff. Good luck with that. Driving home that night, my hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. A lifetime of unequal treatment had culminated in this, my parents threatening legal action because I wouldn't give my home to my perpetually underachieving brother. It seemed too outlandish to be real. Surely they were bluffing, using extreme threats to pressure me into compliance, as they had throughout my childhood. 3 days later, a courier delivered a thick envelope containing a formal legal notice. My parents were suing me for familial property rights over my loft, claiming they had made substantial contributions to its purchase, and that it was intended as a shared family asset. The lawsuit demanded that I either transfer ownership to Ethan or sell the property and divide the proceeds according to their proposed distribution, which would give Ethan 70%. I stood in my kitchen, the legal documents spread before me, feeling as though I'd stepped into an alternate reality. How had a boundary-setting conversation escalated to this? What twisted logic allowed them to believe they had any claim to my home, and how was I supposed to defend myself against my own family? The lawsuit my parents filed was a masterpiece of creative fiction. Reading through the documents with growing disbelief, I discovered an alternate universe where my hard-working, self-sufficient life had apparently been one long act of parental charity. According to their claims, they had provided substantial financial backing for my education. False. My student loans and weekend job had covered that, made significant contributions to my down payment. Absolutely untrue. Every penny had come from my startup equity. Maintained a verbal agreement that the property would serve as a family investment, completely fabricated. Established an understanding that the loft would be shared with family members in need, never once discussed. The documents were peppered with phrases like family trust, an implied contractual obligation that sounded legal but seemed designed to obscure the simple truth: they had no legitimate claim whatsoever. My first call was to Madison, who listened in stunned silence before saying simply, "You need a lawyer. A good one." Through a colleague's recommendation, I found Jessica Bennett, a family law attorney with a reputation for handling unusual cases. At our first meeting in her downtown office, she reviewed the documents with a professional poker face that only occasionally gave way to raised eyebrows. "Legally speaking, this is creative," she said, finally setting the papers aside. "Without written agreements or financial records showing their contributions, they're essentially arguing for an implied trust based on family relationships. It's a stretch, to put it mildly." "So it's frivolous?" I asked hopefully. Not exactly frivolous enough to get dismissed immediately, but certainly lacking in substantive evidence. Unfortunately, family court can sometimes be unpredictable when emotions are involved. She advised me to gather all financial records related to the purchase of my loft, my college expenses, and any financial interactions with my parents. "We need to create an airtight paper trail showing you purchased this property independently." As I left her office, my phone pinged with a bank alert: unusual withdrawal from account, ending in 7,842. This was an old joint savings account my parents had opened for me when I was 16. I'd kept it active with a small balance, mostly out of sentiment, occasionally using it to send my parents money for birthdays or emergencies. Logging into the mobile app, I discovered my parents had withdrawn all $4,000 money I had earned and deposited, leaving the account empty. When I called the bank, they confirmed that as joint account holders, my parents had every legal right to withdraw the funds. My next call was to my father, who answered with infuriating casualness. "Oh, that money. Well, we need to cover our legal fees somehow. Besides, according to our position, family resources should be shared based on need." His tone carried the smug certainty of someone who believes they've found a clever loophole. This was just the beginning of a systematic campaign to pressure me into submission. Through mutual friends and family members, I learned my parents were telling a dramatically distorted version of events, portraying me as an ungrateful son, attempting to force my brilliant but struggling brother into homelessness. "Your mother called me crying," my Aunt Susan told me during an uncomfortable phone call. "She said you're trying to destroy Ethan's last chance at success. Is that true, Lucian?" "Absolutely not," I replied, exhaustion creeping into my voice after having this conversation multiple times. I offered to help him find an apartment, and even pay his first month's rent. I offered to connect him with a good job. "What I won't do is give him my home." "But family should help family," she persisted. "Your brother has special creative gifts." The same narrative appeared on social media, where relatives who hadn't spoken to me in years suddenly felt entitled to publicly comment on my character. My cousin wrote a vague posting about privileged family members hoarding resources while others struggle, which received supportive comments from various relatives, including my parents. The isolation was perhaps the most painful aspect. People I had considered friends took sides without hearing my perspective. Long-standing family relationships became strained or severed completely. With each passing day, I felt increasingly alone in my stance, doubting myself despite knowing I was in the right. Madison remained my steadfast ally, along with a few close friends who knew me well enough to see through the distortions. "What they're doing is emotional blackmail," my friend Derek said over beers one night. "Stand your ground." As the court date approached, Jessica and I worked tirelessly, preparing our case. I provided bank statements tracing every dollar of my down payment documentation of my student loans, pay stubs from my college jobs, and mortgage paperwork, showing I was the sole borrower. We assembled a comprehensive timeline demonstrating my financial independence and the absence of any parental contribution to my property. Then, 2 weeks before our court date, I ran into Ethan at a coffee shop in Wicker Park, far from his usual haunts. He looked uncomfortable when he spotted me nearly turning to leave, before reluctantly approaching my table. "Hey," he said, his usual confidence notably diminished. "Ethan," I acknowledged, unsure how to interact with the brother who was party to a lawsuit against me. An awkward silence stretched between us until he finally blurted, "This wasn't my idea, you know, the lawsuit. But you're going along with it," I pointed out. He shrugged, eyes darting around the cafe. "They're really convinced they have a case. Dad found some lawyer who told him about family equity principles or something." I studied my brother's face, seeing a flicker of the kid I'd grown up with beneath the affected artistic persona. "Why is this loft so important to you, Ethan?" "There are other apartments. I offered to help you find one." He hesitated, then lowered his voice. "They promised it to me." "Okay." "Said it was practically a done deal. That you'd see reason, or they'd handle it legally." "Promised it to you when?" "Months ago. They said you had always gotten the practical support, college help, career guidance, so I deserved the creative support. That this was my turn." The revelation shouldn't have shocked me, but it did. My parents had been planning this betrayal for months, assuring Ethan of success before they'd even approached me. Our conversation ended awkwardly, with Ethan extracting a promise that I wouldn't tell our parents we'd spoken. As he left, he turned back briefly. "For what it's worth, I did tell them, your place wasn't that ideal for my creative space. The acoustics are all wrong." Even in the midst of this madness, he maintained his pretensions. The final blow came 3 days later, when Jessica called, her voice tight with controlled urgency. "Lucian, we've found something concerning in the discovery documents. There appear to be loan applications submitted in your name that you didn't authorize." "What kind of loans?" I asked, a cold dread spreading through me. "Personal loans, 3 of them, totaling about $30,000. The applications used your personal information, but listed your parents' address for correspondence. The funds were deposited into an account you're not associated with." "That's identity theft," I said, the words feeling surreal as they left my mouth. "Yes," Jessica confirmed grimly. "And based on the signatures which don't match yours from other documents, we have reason to believe your parents may have been involved." The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined. Not only were they trying to take my home through fraudulent claims, but they had potentially committed a crime using my identity. For what purpose? To fund their lawsuit against me. To support Ethan's latest doomed venture. The violation left me breathless with anger and hurt. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice hardly recognizable to my own ears. "We bring this evidence to court," Jessica replied firmly. "This changes everything." The county courthouse was an imposing limestone structure that had witnessed countless family disputes, but I doubted many as bewildering as ours. Sitting at the defendant's table beside Jessica, I watched my parents and Ethan enter with their attorney, a balding man, with an expensive suit and a permanent expression of mild disdain. My mother caught my eye briefly, before looking away, her face a mask of righteous determination. Judge Eleanor Harmon, a woman in her 60s, with silver-streaked dark hair and penetrating eyes, presided over our case. Her reputation for no-nonsense efficiency preceded her, and she began by making it clear she expected focused arguments without emotional theatrics. "This court's time is valuable," she stated, reviewing the documents before her. "I've read your filings, and I must say this is an unusual claim of family property rights. Let's proceed directly to opening statements." My parents' attorney, Martin Wells, presented their case first. His argument wove together selective truths, outright falsehoods, and emotional appeals with practiced smoothness. "Your Honor, this case fundamentally concerns family obligation and shared investment," he began. "Robert and Karen Mitchell, provided substantial support throughout their son, Lucian's education and early career, with the understanding that family resources would benefit both their children according to their unique needs. He painted my parents as selfless providers who had poured resources into my development while claiming they had directly contributed to my loft purchase through family funds historically set aside for both children's establishment. He described me as the financially successful son who now refused to acknowledge my brother's legitimate claim to family resources. Ethan Mitchell possesses extraordinary creative talents that require the right environment to flourish, an environment his parents helped create through their investments in the property in question. When Ethan took the stand, he delivered a performance worthy of the acting classes he'd briefly taken before deciding the industry was too commercial. With earnest eyes and vulnerable pauses, he described himself as a misunderstood artistic genius whose breakthrough was perpetually just around the corner. My work challenges conventional forms, he explained, seemingly forgetting this was a courtroom, not a gallery opening. I need a space that supports the creative process, the light, the energy, the connection to the urban environment. The loft has exactly the right qualities. When asked why he couldn't simply find another apartment, his expression turned pained. You can't just replicate creative energy. This space has a special connection to our family's journey. My mother testified next, her voice trembling with well-timed emotion, as she described how they had always intended for family resources to be shared equitably between their children. We paid for Lucian's education, supported his career path, helped with his living expenses during college, she claimed, conveniently omitting that my living expenses consisted of occasional care packages of homemade cookies and Proust and toiletries. We always understood that this support would be balanced by ensuring Ethan received equivalent help for his different path. My father's testimony focused on vague claims of verbal agreements and family understandings, peppered with anecdotes about their sacrifices for my success. We went without, so Lucian could have opportunities, he said, seemingly forgetting that I had worked throughout high school and college, while Ethan received ongoing financial support well into adulthood. Throughout their testimonies, I maintained my composure, though, internally, I cycled through disbelief, anger, and profound sadness. These were the people who had raised me now, sitting in a courtroom, systematically misrepresenting our shared history to take away my home. When Jessica began our defense, her approach was methodical and evidence-based, a stark contrast to the emotional narrative presented by my parents' side. Your Honor, this case can be resolved through documentary evidence. Rather than family mythology, she stated clearly. We will demonstrate that Lucian Mitchell purchased his property independently, without financial contribution from his parents, and that no agreement, verbal, implied, or otherwise ever existed regarding shared ownership or usage. She presented a comprehensive timeline of my financial independence, submitting bank records, showing every dollar of my down payment, traced back to my own earnings primarily from the startup equity I'd received. She introduced my student loan documentation work history throughout college, and the complete mortgage application showing I was the sole borrower with no co-signers or additional contributors. When I took the stand, I spoke directly and factually about my path to homeownership, addressing the false claims one by one. I acknowledged my parents' emotional support, but made it clear they had not contributed financially to my education or property purchase. I've always been willing to help my brother in practical ways, I testified. I offered to help him find an apartment and pay his first month's rent. I offered to connect him with job opportunities that would still leave him time for his creative projects. What I am not willing to do is give up my home, a home I purchased through my own hard work and savings. Judge Harmon interrupted occasionally with pointed questions, particularly regarding the alleged verbal agreements my parents claimed existed. Mr. Mitchell, was there ever a discussion where you agreed your property would be available for your brother's use? No, Your Honor. No such conversation ever took place. Was there ever an indication that your parents contributed financially to your property, with the expectation of having input into its usage? Absolutely not. They did not contribute to the purchase, and there was never any discussion of shared usage rights. As our evidence mounted, I could see my parents growing increasingly uncomfortable. Their attorney began making more dramatic gestures, objecting to evidence on flimsy grounds and emphasizing emotional appeals over factual rebuttals. It was the legal equivalent of throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what might stick. Then came the moment that changed everything. Jessica introduced the evidence we'd discovered during preparation, the unauthorized loan applications made in my name. Your Honor, during discovery, we uncovered these loan documents showing applications made in Lucian Mitchell's name, but without his knowledge or consent. Signature analysis indicates they were not signed by my client, and the correspondence address listed is the parent's home, not Lucian's residence. The courtroom fell silent. Judge Harmon examined the documents with intense focus, occasionally glancing up at my parents, who suddenly found the floor fascinating. Mr. Wells, she addressed my parents' attorney. Were you aware of these loan applications? Their lawyer appeared genuinely surprised, suggesting this particular deception hadn't been shared with him. I would need time to consult with my clients about these documents, Your Honor. Judge Harmon wasn't finished. Additionally, I noticed these loans were approved and dispersed to an account number that doesn't match any of Mr. Lucian Mitchell's accounts submitted in evidence. Can anyone explain where these funds went? My father shifted uncomfortably in his seat. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Ethan looked genuinely confused, suggesting he might not have been privy to this particular aspect of their plan. Jessica produced bank records showing transfers from the unknown account to an overseas entity. Your Honor, we've traced partial transfers from these loan proceeds to a company called Creative Horizon Investments, based in the Cayman Islands. We have reason to believe this may be connected to a business scheme that Mr. Ethan Mitchell was involved with. Ethan's head snapped up. What I don't know anything about Cayman Islands. The judge called for a 15-minute recess, during which my parents huddled intensely with their attorney in a corner of the courtroom. When we reconvened, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. Your Honor, my parents' attorney began, his confident demeanor noticeably diminished in light of the new evidence presented. My clients would like to withdraw their claim regarding the property ownership. Judge Harmon fixed my parents with a stern gaze. Before I rule on this withdrawal, I want to be clear that the court has serious concerns about the loan applications presented today. Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell, these documents suggest potentially fraudulent activity that goes beyond civil matters into criminal territory. My father attempted to interject with some explanation about family financial management, but the judge cut him off sharply. I'm dismissing the property claim with prejudice, she ruled, meaning it cannot be refiled. Additionally, I'm referring the loan documentation to the district attorney's office for review of possible identity theft and fraud charges. Mr. Lucian Mitchell, you may wish to file a police report regarding the unauthorized use of your identity. As the gavel came down, the surreal nature of the situation washed over me. I had successfully defended my home, but at what cost? My family relationships lay in ruins. My parents potentially faced criminal charges, and the betrayal that had unfolded would leave scars that might never fully heal. Outside the courtroom, I watched my parents hurry toward the exit, their postures betraying defeat and perhaps finally shame. Ethan lingered behind, approaching me with uncharacteristic hesitation. Lucian, I swear I didn't know about those loans, he said, his artistic affectations momentarily stripped away. They told me they had money set aside for my project. I never would have agreed to. His voice trailed off, as he seemed to realize there was no easy way to finish that sentence. In his eyes, I saw confusion, and the dawning realization that the parents who had always cushioned his reality had built that cushion on increasingly desperate deceptions. We'll talk later, I told him, not ready for reconciliation, but acknowledging his apparent innocence in this particular aspect of the betrayal. I think we all need some time. As I left the courthouse with Jessica, she turned to me with concern. The judge was right about filing a police report, and you should consider credit monitoring going forward. I nodded numbly, still processing. What happens to them now? That depends on whether the DA decides to pursue charges and whether you choose to press charges yourself. But Lucian, she added gently, their financial actions suggest there might be more going on than just this lawsuit. The overseas transfers are particularly concerning. Her words would prove prophetic in the days to come, as the full extent of my parents' financial desperation came to light. The week following the court case passed in a blur of emotional exhaustion and practical follow-up. I filed a police report about the identity theft, froze my credit, and began the tedious process of disputing the fraudulent loans. Madison stayed with me most nights, her presence a steady comfort as I navigated the aftermath of what felt like a family implosion. 10 days after the court hearing, I received a call from a detective marshal with the Financial Crimes Unit. "Mr. Mitchell, we've been investigating the loans taken out in your name, and we've uncovered some additional information you should be aware of." What he shared left me stunned. My parents hadn't just taken out 3 loans in my name, they had been victims themselves of an elaborate investment scam. Over the past year, they had gradually liquidated their retirement savings, remortgaged their house, and eventually resorted to identity theft, all to send money to Creative Horizon Investments, a fraudulent company that had promised to fund and promote Ethan's multimedia project with guaranteed returns. From what we can piece together, Detective Marshall explained they were initially approached by someone claiming to be a talent scout who had seen some of your brother's work online. This individual introduced them to the supposed investment company, which presented elaborate prospectuses and fake testimonials from artists who had made it big through their program. The scammers had expertly played on my parents' greatest vulnerability, their belief in Ethan's unrecognized genius, and their desperate desire to see him succeed. With each payment, they were promised they were getting closer to a major breakthrough for Ethan's career, complete with fabricated interest from fictional industry executives. Unfortunately, this is a sophisticated operation we've seen targeting families of aspiring artists. They research their marks thoroughly, including identifying other family members whose identities might be exploited when the victim's own resources run dry. The detective's words left me with conflicted emotions, anger at my parents' actions, but also a growing understanding of the desperate hope that had driven them to such extremes. They had lost nearly everything: their retirement savings, their home equity, and now potentially their freedom. I sat with this knowledge for days, unsure how to proceed. The betrayal still stung deeply, yet the context of their actions added layers of complexity to my anger. Madison listened as I processed aloud, offering perspective without pushing me toward any particular decision. "They did something terrible," she acknowledged, "and they dragged you into court rather than admitting what happened. But people who are drowning don't always make rational choices." After much deliberation, I drove to my parents' house on a Sunday afternoon. The property looked different somehow. The proud family home of my childhood, now bearing visible signs of neglect. The flower beds my mother had always maintained meticulously were overgrown, and my father's car, usually gleaming from his weekend washing ritual, sat dusty in the driveway. They answered the door together, looking years older than they had in court just weeks earlier. My mother's eyes were red-rimmed from crying, and my father's confident posture had collapsed into something diminished and uncertain. "Lucian," my mother breathed, her voice catching. "We didn't expect." "Can I come in?" I asked, maintaining a neutral tone. The living room was cluttered with papers, financial statements, legal notices, and what appeared to be printouts of email exchanges with the fraudulent investment company. They cleared a space for me on the couch, awkwardly my father gathering papers with trembling hands. I spoke with Detective Marshall. I began directly, watching their faces fall further. "I know about the scam." My father's shoulders slumped. "We were such fools," he whispered, his voice hollow with shame. "We just wanted so badly for Ethan to have his chance." "We never meant to drag you into this mess," my mother added tearfully. "When we realized we'd been scammed, we were desperate. We thought, if we could just get access to your loft, sell it, or borrow against it, we could recover some of what we'd lost before Ethan found out." "Ethan doesn't know?" I asked, surprised. They exchanged glances. "He knows something went wrong with the funding," my father explained, "but not the full extent. Not that we've lost everything." "Where is he now?" Another uncomfortable exchange of looks. "We don't know exactly," my mother admitted. "After the court case, he was upset. He said he needed space, that he was going to stay with a friend from his art collective. He hasn't returned our calls for days." The revelation that Ethan had essentially abandoned them in their moment of crisis stirred complicated feelings. The pattern was painfully familiar when things got difficult. Ethan disappeared, leaving others to deal with the consequences. "Why didn't you just tell me what was happening?" I asked, the question that had been burning inside me. I might have been able to help before things got so out of hand. My father's face crumpled with long overdue recognition. "Because we were ashamed. And because He hesitated, then pushed forward with difficult honesty, because we've always found it easier to ask you to accommodate Ethan than to ask him to face reality. We've been unfair to you your entire life, my mother added softly. We expected so much from you, and so little from him. When you succeeded despite our lack of support, we somehow twisted it in our minds to believe you didn't need us while he did. Their admissions, painful, long overdue recognitions of the family dynamic I had navigated my entire life, opened something in my chest that had been tightly clenched for as long as I could remember. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the prerequisite conditions for it to eventually grow. We talked for hours that afternoon, peeling back layers of family history and examining patterns that had seemed immutable. They showed me the elaborate communications from the scammers, professional-looking websites, forged documents from entertainment companies, even manipulated photos showing Ethan's artwork in fictional gallery spaces. What will you do now? I finally asked as evening approached. The house will have to be sold to cover the loans, my father said quietly. We've spoken with a bankruptcy attorney. At our age, starting over is. He trailed off, the magnitude of their situation hanging in the silence. I left that night without concrete promises, but with a decision forming. The next morning, I called Jessica to discuss options for helping my parents deal with the fraud case, without exposing myself to further financial risk. I contacted the detective again to understand what would happen if I chose not to press charges for the identity theft while still holding my parents accountable in other ways. A week later, I arranged another meeting, this time at a neutral location, a quiet cafe near my office. I laid out what I was willing to do: help them find legal representation for the fraud case, connect them with resources for financial recovery, and maintain a relationship with boundaries firmly in place. What I would not do was sacrifice my own financial security or allow unhealthy family dynamics to continue unchallenged. We don't deserve your help, my mother said, eyes downcast. Maybe not, I acknowledged honestly, but I'm offering it anyway with conditions. Complete transparency from now on. Financial boundaries that are respected, absolutely. And a recognition that Ethan needs to stand on his own 2 feet. They agreed, the humbling experience of losing everything, having finally cracked open their perspective on our family's dysfunction. As we worked together over the following weeks to address the practical fallout of their situation, I received a text from an unknown number. It's Ethan. Heard what happened with Mom and Dad. Crashed at Wade's place, but he's kicking me out. Can we talk? The scammer situation had accomplished what years of family discussions could not. It had finally brought Ethan face to face with reality. In our subsequent meeting at a downtown diner, I found him change, the artistic affectations stripped away, replaced with a sobering recognition of his part in our family's unhealthy patterns. I never thought they'd go so far, he said, stirring his coffee absently, risking everything, breaking the law, all because they believed in me that much. It wasn't healthy belief, I pointed out. It was enabling. He nodded slowly. I'm starting to see that. For what it's worth, I'm sorry about the lawsuit. I should have stood up, said something. It wasn't a complete transformation. Years of entitlement wouldn't dissolve overnight. But it was a start. When he asked if he could stay with me, just until things stabilize, I maintained my boundary with newfound confidence. No, but I'll help you find an affordable place and connect you with some job opportunities. The rest is up to you. To my surprise, he accepted this without the usual dramatic protests. 2 days later, he took an entry-level position at a graphic design firm, where my friend worked, not the revolutionary artistic breakthrough he'd always imagined, but an honest start. The scammer who had preyed on my parents was eventually identified as part of an international fraud ring that specifically targeted families of aspiring artists and performers. Through one of Ethan's artistic connections, a man he'd met at a gallery opening who had shown excessive interest in his work, they had gained detailed information about our family dynamics and financial situations, crafting their approach to exploit exactly the vulnerabilities that existed. While the legal process to recover their losses would be lengthy, and likely only partially successful, the experience had forced a reckoning that perhaps no other intervention could have. My parents had lost their material security, but in the process they had finally begun to recognize the damaging patterns they had maintained for decades. 6 months after the court case, I stood by the windows of my downtown loft, watching the autumn light play across the Chicago skyline. The space remained mine, a sanctuary earned through years of work, and recently defended against unexpected threats. Yet my relationship with this home had evolved the pride of ownership, now tempered with deeper reflections on family boundaries and the true meaning of support. In the months following the lawsuit, I had helped my parents navigate the complex aftermath of financial fraud. Working with authorities, we had managed to recover about 15% of their losses when officials froze some of the scammers' accounts. It wasn't enough to save their house, but it provided a modest foundation as they moved into a small apartment and began rebuilding their lives with a humility that was entirely new to our family dynamic. The process wasn't smooth or sentimental like a television movie resolution. There were difficult conversations, setbacks, and moments when old patterns threatened to reassert themselves. When my father suggested that perhaps I could co-sign for a better apartment than they could afford on their own, I had to firmly redirect the conversation to realistic options within their means. When my mother hinted that Ethan might need additional financial help just until his career takes off, I reminded her of our agreement to let him find his own path. Old habits die hard, Madison observed one evening as I recounted these interactions. But they're trying, and so are you. Madison had been my anchor throughout the ordeal, offering perspective without judgment and support without enabling. On a crisp October evening, as we walked along the lakefront, I had asked her to marry me. The vintage emerald ring chosen because she had once mentioned loving her grandmother's emerald pendant now caught the light as she moved about my kitchen, preparing dinner for our small gathering. Tonight would be the first time my entire family would be in my home together since before the lawsuit. The symbolism wasn't lost on any of us, this space that had been the center of conflict, now becoming a place for cautious reunion. Ethan arrived first bearing a bottle of wine, and a nervousness that manifested in slightly too loud greetings. 3 months into his job at the design firm, he had recently been given his first independent project for a small local business. It wasn't the revolutionary artistic breakthrough he had once imagined, but the modest pride he took in the accomplishment seemed healthier than his previous grandiose visions. The client actually liked my first concept he mentioned, as he helped arrange glasses on the counter. Didn't have to redo everything 5 times like the last project. "That's great," I replied, noting the absence of his usual dismissive comments about commercial constraints on his creativity. Learning to work within parameters is its own skill. He nodded a thoughtful expression, replacing what would once have been reflexive defensiveness. "I'm starting to see that. Structure isn't always the enemy of creativity." My parents arrived minutes later, my father carrying a homemade casserole, a peace offering of sorts. They moved through my space with a respect that hadn't been present before, complimenting the home without the underlying current of calculation that had characterized their previous visits. Dinner conversation remained carefully light, skimming the surface of neutral topics as we all navigated this new terrain. It wasn't until dessert that my father cleared his throat and addressed the elephant in the room. "I want to say something," he began, setting down his fork. "Being in this home tonight, a home we tried to take from you, Lucian brings home the magnitude of what we did. There's no excuse for our actions, but I hope you know how deeply we regret the pain we caused." My mother reached across to squeeze my hand. "We failed you as parents in many ways, expecting you to be the responsible one while shielding Ethan from consequences, taking your success for granted while pouring resources into his potential. The lawsuit was the culmination of patterns we should have addressed decades ago. Their words weren't perfect, and they didn't erase the hurt of years of unequal treatment or the betrayal of the lawsuit. But they were honest, perhaps the first truly honest assessment they had ever offered of our family dynamics. I think we're all learning," I replied carefully. "About boundaries, about healthy support, versus enabling, about what family should really mean." Ethan, who had been uncharacteristically quiet during this exchange, finally spoke. "I've been seeing a therapist," he admitted, studying his water glass intently. "Turns out, having your parents lose everything because they believed in your non-existent artistic breakthrough is quite the wake-up call." The hint of his old self-deprecating humor broke the tension, allowing a cautious warmth to flow into our conversation. We weren't healed, not completely, but we were acknowledging the wounds openly for the first time. As the evening wound down and my family prepared to leave, I found myself reflecting on the journey of the past year. The lawsuit that had seemed like the ultimate betrayal had paradoxically created an opportunity for truth and growth that might never have come otherwise. By standing firm on my boundaries, refusing to give up my home despite enormous pressure, I had not only protected myself, but ultimately forced a reckoning that our family had avoided for decades. In the weeks that followed, I continued to maintain clear boundaries while gradually rebuilding trust. I helped my parents connect with financial counseling services, but declined to cover their expenses directly. I offered Ethan career advice when he asked, but resisted the urge to solve his problems for him. And most importantly, I protected the life I had built through years of hard work, no longer feeling guilty for my success or responsible for others' choices. The healing wasn't instantaneous or complete. There were still moments when old patterns threatened to reassert themselves, a hint of entitlement in Ethan's requests, a flicker of enabling in my parents' suggestions. But each time we recognized the pattern more quickly, adjusting course with increasing awareness. Perhaps the most profound change was within myself. The guilt I had carried for years for succeeding when Ethan struggled for establishing boundaries, for wanting recognition of my efforts, had finally begun to dissolve. I understood now that true family support meant encouraging independence and growth, not enabling dependency or entitlement. Standing in my loft, the home I had defended against those who should have celebrated my achievement, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for years. My success wasn't something to apologize for. My boundaries weren't selfish. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for family is to stand firm in your truth, even when it's painful. The lawsuit that had seemed like the end of our family had instead become a difficult but necessary catalyst for change. By refusing to surrender what I had earned, I had ultimately created space for something healthier to grow in the ruins of our old patterns. As I look back on this challenging chapter of my life, I realize that sometimes the hardest battles we fight are the ones that lead to the most important growth. Standing up for yourself doesn't mean abandoning those you love. It means creating relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation or guilt. And while the journey was painful, I wouldn't trade the clarity and peace I've found for anything. Have you ever had to stand your ground with family, even when it felt impossible? Or discovered that a painful conflict ultimately led to necessary change? Share your experiences in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe if this story resonated with you. Remember, setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's essential for healthy relationships. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it helps someone else finding themselves caught between family loyalty and self-respect.